relieved Joyce of her duties of the formal introductions and each one of us being brought to the stage one by one. I'd like to get started as soon as we can. What I will do is I'll briefly introduce each speaker right now. My name is Arshia. Next to me is Judith, who currently works as the book attaché at the French Embassy in India. She started there in September 2010, so she's 1 year old in this very business. Before that, she worked at the book office in Bucharest, in Romania from 2004 to 2006. And then she worked with Gallimard Publishers in the Foreign Rights Department. So she also, I imagine, deals with issues of copyright and moving texts not simply from one language to another, but from one country to another. Nita Gupta is a publisher at Yatra Books. She's also the editor of the Bharatiya Anuvad Parishad's quarterly journal on translation. The journal is called, surprisingly, Anuvad. In 2010, Yatra Books launched an independent international bookshelf which contains translations from Catalan, French, and Italian into Indian languages, and it's published in collaboration with European publishers and institutes. Arunav Sinha is an award-winning translator. He translates from Bengali, both classical and contemporary fiction. He has translated Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, he's translated Rabindranath Tagore, and in more contemporary work, he has translated, among others, Moti Nandi and Buddhadeva Bose. His translation of Shankar's Chaurangi won the Vodafone Crossword Translation Award Prize in 2007 and was also shortlisted for the Independent Best Foreign Fiction Prize in the UK in 2009. Next to him is K. Satyanarayan, who is the co-founder of New Horizon Media, a Chennai-based Indian language publishing house with focuses on non-fiction. They use multiple formats, including print books, audiobooks, and ebooks. But, for me, for my money, what is most interesting about Satya is that he's a co-founder of Crick Info. So he has the heart of every Indian man in this room. And then next to him is Robin De Cruz, who was a member of the editorial board of the Eureka Children's Science magazine, and later served as a member of the publication committee of the KSSP. At present, he is director of the Kerala State Institute of Children's Literature and edits Daliru, a children's magazine for children above 10. And last at the end, but not least, is Winston Cruz, from the National Translation Mission, which is a Ministry of Human Resource Development initiative for translating and publishing knowledge texts related to higher education. Winston has worked with publishers within and outside the country at various levels for obtaining copyrights and assigning translation in regional languages. And in case you haven't looked at your agenda, this panel is managing the translation market. Yes? So there's two of us here who are translators. There are three people here who can speak for various government initiatives, some from inside the country, some from outside the country, and then of course there are publishers as well. So each of us is a practitioner in some sense, and I think between us we kind of wrap up the market. I don't know, so we are here this evening to talk about translation, and translation as a part of the larger book market, translation as a larger part of the larger publishing enterprise. Most simply, translation, I think, means that we get to read from languages and cultures that are not our own. And I have to say, over the years, I've completely lost patience with people who say, oh, I don't like translations because you don't know what you're losing. I was like, what are you complaining about? What are you losing? You're gaining a whole other text, a text that you would never have access to were it not for the work of the translator. Yeah? So having got beyond what we lose in translation, I think what we'll be spending our time this afternoon talking about is what we gain through translation. And before I go any further, I think on behalf of all of us, really like to thank Leonard and Queenie and this amazing team of people that have been keeping us going, fed, watered, amplified, photographed, taken care of in every possible way for 2 days. So I'm sure they're going to thank us, but let's thank them before they do that. Okay, also because it is the last panel of the day, and I'm sure people have been holding things inside them that they're dying to say, we'll try and we'll open up this panel as soon as we possibly can. I must say that when I wrote to my co-panelists and said, you know, I think everybody should speak for a little while, I said 15 minutes about what they do and how they do it, and they all wrote back and said, no, 2 minutes, yes? So just as an exercise, you should time them. None of them is going to speak for 2 minutes only, I can promise you that, yes? Even Arnab Sinha, who started this whole I'm not going to speak business, even if he just states his name, anyway, you get the point, right? So, so we will all speak for 2 minutes, and then since there's so many people in the house who are related, who have done work related to translation, the people from Tulika Books, for example, there's somebody here who's worked with Katha, Ellen this morning who spoke about translations in a very different context. So we'll get started and then we'll just expect for you to jump in as well. Very briefly, a few sort of parameters within which we might hold this discussion. We were talking earlier among ourselves about how in India we don't have really a tradition of translation. In India, we're very happy to deal with retellings and transcreations, and I think that's something that's been with us for centuries. Like the Ramayana, for example, which is a text that I work on. The first Ramayanas were already transcreations, they were already retellings. Kamba, the Kamba Ramayana, says, I'm just a cat that, what does he say? Oh, I'm just a cat who laps at the ocean of milk created by Valmiki. Yeah? Tulsidas has a very, very dominant and very, very powerful Ramayana from the 15th century in Hindi. So they're all telling the same story, but nobody is translating the Sanskrit text. Everybody is saying, I have absorbed this text, let me tell it to you in the way that I know best. So the idea of translating in India, translating in the Western sense of the word, is relatively new. It's very much from this century. Of course, the Sahitya Academy has been translating texts across English languages, Indian languages for 60 odd years now. Many of us have problems with those translations. Apart from the quality of the translations themselves, they are so poorly distributed that we can't access them. So it's when the big multinational publishers came to India in the late 80s and the early 90s that translation got a real impetus. And I think it was Penguin first, and very, very shortly followed by Katha, where people sought out Indian translators for Indian texts. Yeah? There's another argument that is often made against translation. It's like, oh, why are you translating Ramayana? There are so many translations of it. Well, how wonderful is that? Yeah, the more translations of Ramayana there is, the closer we might get to the original text. More than that, I think that every generation needs its own translation of the classics. Yeah? We always translate into the idiom of our time. So it's easier, I think, to read a Ramayana translated in the late 90s than it is to read one that was translated in 1850 or in 1920. So translation it's something, I think, that of course enriches us all because it gives us access to books and texts that we might otherwise not be able to read. But in another way, it enhances what we already have. I was very struck by Evan's point in the morning about the languages that are not dominant. It's very important to have those works translated into dominant languages, but it's equally important to translate works back into smaller languages because they are enriched thereby. And mainly, that's the one way we have of keeping them from becoming obsolete. Yeah. I think much, well, certainly, I'm sorry I wasn't here yesterday, so I can't make reference to what happened before today. But I seem to remember hearing a couple of times the concern that we are losing our languages in India, in metropolitan cities. And of course we're losing our languages, but the one thing that will keep our literatures with us, if not alive, is the act of translation. Yes, so that is my pitch for why translation is so important and why translators need to be protected. We are a dying species. So having said that, I will now give my panelists their 2 minutes. So I think we're going to start with Bill.
Hello everybody. I'm Ruben Dicruz. I'm Director, Kerala State Institute of Children's Literature. Before that, I worked with the National Book Trust for a long time, so I think I will just talk to you with both the experiences. As my predecessor said, that see, India is a naturally translation country with all these languages and the exchanges we are compelled to do. As she said, the translation started with the Ramayana translation and later Bharata, etc. And these works were translated into Persian and Arabic, and through those languages it went abroad too. Bible translations were the first of printed books in many of Indian languages. I do not like the word regional language or vernacular language. Many people were using those words. None of Indian languages are regional. There is no central language and then other languages. So we have equally important many languages. And see, there are a lot of translations done as part of our national movement, and those translations played a major role in construction of our nationality. See, NBT and Sahitya Academy, etc., started their translation programs in this background. Tagore and Premchand translations and Bharati translations were part of our national movement. NBT publishes in 18 plus languages, and Sahitya Academy also publishes in 22 languages. Yes, there are complaints about the quality of translations of NBT and Sahitya Academy. But before the multinationals came into the picture, or before the liberalization and before there were so many publishers, these organizations played a vital role in introducing one's literature into other regions. NBT's series called Adan Pradhan played a major role in introducing Tamil literature to Kannada and Kannada literature to Gujarati, and with limitations. But these translations were made available at low cost in all nooks and corners of India. Might not be very visible in the metros, but it was made available in Nagarkoil to Silchar. And other than Adan Pradhan, NBT's series Nehru Bal Pustakalaya, which published children's books in all Indian languages, and especially the earlier children's books published by NBT were the best in the country, made available again in very low prices. And in all languages, it was translated in all languages and very well distributed. I think my generation started reading in NBT books and the old era Soviet books. Again, they were also translations. I worked in NBT for 15 years, and it was a very interesting place of translation. There were 16 language editors sitting in few rooms, and I mean all of their perspectives will be from their language. The Oriya person will comment on one issue from Oriya perspective, and the Tamil person reacting to it from Tamil. It was very interesting, and it gives you an idea of what India is and what are you working on. And later, multinational companies entered in the area of translations, and Indian language works were translated into English. But there is still not much work is not done on translation among Indian languages. There is not too much big, I mean, there are translation to English and from English to Indian languages, but not much even now. And I think later multinational companies started publishing in Indian languages too. At least many of them are considering the idea of publishing in Malayalam, Marathi, Bangla. Say, for example, Penguin started publishing in Malayalam, Bangla, Hindi, and Marathi. But I don't think those projects are grown much, or there are not much being done on. And see, I can say from the experience of Malayalam that there were many translators from the period of freedom movement, and these senior people are no more. And there are not too many. Say, for example, from Bangla, there were almost every work from Bangla were translated into Malayalam same time few years back, and it was translated with a missionaries, like the Bible were translated by a couple of translators, and once they stopped working, now either through English or through Hindi, Bangla works are being translated into Malayalam. I think this will be the case of many languages, and I expect these are the area where now you cannot expect a national movement seal of translators. You need professionals, professionally paid trained professionals, training programs, etc. I think that is the area where National Translation Mission will work. And it is also an area for multinational companies to work. I see that this is a huge area. Indian language publishing is a huge market. It need not be a politically correct position. It is a sensible market decision to publish in Indian languages and translations. And in Kerala State Institute, when I started publishing translations, I had two things in mind. It is not just providing children what your neighbor thinks or how your neighbor lives, but also it is a way to introduce the best practices from other languages. I think I could introduce many very fine books into Malayalam, and Malayalam children's publishing as a whole was influenced by these books. I published books by Tuliga in a big way, and I published a few books from other publishers. Recently we published 2 books from Mappin, and we have published a few Swedish books, etc. And these books were received very, very, very well. And I think that shows that they were sold in good numbers. Many of them were sold 8,000 copies in a year, and some of them similarly 8,000 copies in 2 years. We published 5,000 copies in the first imprint and then 3,000 copies in the second edition. So there is a good market for translations, and especially the good works. Some of the books I liked in the translation, liked by the readers, were one was the mountain who loved the bird, the birdhood. Sorry? The mountain who loved the bird. And I was surprised to read a teacher writing in Madhubhumi Weekly, which is a very prestigious weekly in Kerala. About this, she wrote a story. She was writing about the book, saying that how that book influenced a student in her class. I hope I am not taking too much time.
6 more minutes.
Yeah, but I told her I will take 3 minutes. See this. It's in a village near Trivandrum. A new teacher, headmistress, was transferred to that school, and she found that one student, every break, every interval, that student goes to the staff room and stand there. All other children are allowed to play, because if you allow him to play with others, it is sure that he will make some mischief. Either he will throw a stone to a bird or something like that. So she said it cannot be like this. He also has the right to play. And she gave him a copy of this book. He read that book, and the profound influence that book made in that boy was narrated in that experience. It is a column of teachers' experiences. It is not a book review column. I thought this made my 4 years in Institute of Children's Literature. Similarly, the book Why Girl by Mahashwara Devi. I could listen to the tribal children reacting to this story. And see, there was another book we published was 5 Mamamoo stories from Sweden. This is what, I mean, I selected these books because such concepts are not very common in Indian children's, especially Indian language children's literature. I don't know, many of you must be familiar with this book. It is so quite popular among children's books. It is a story of an old cow who wanted to do unusual things, want to swing in a swing, want to climb a tree, etc. And the kind of reviews I got, the kind of response I got were much more than I expected. It also sold very well. So I think similar translations are possible in Indian languages, and we require such translations. See, another thing is the Indian language publishing is, in most of the languages, are not in a very good shape. Such exchanges, translations, help everyone to sustain. In Balasahitya Institute, we try to organize a copyright table in last 3 years to make a forum for copyright exchange among Indian languages. I'm sorry to say that it was not a success, and it was not taken by Indian publishers in a big way, as we expected. And see, from Malayalam experience, I can say at present in Malayalam, translations sell more than original works, especially in fiction. Most of the international bestsellers are immediately translated into Malayalam, but not too many Indian languages, as Kannan complains, not too many from other Indian languages. So I think this is an area we should look into more detail, how to give a support to translation among Indian languages. And especially in children's literature, there are more possibilities of translations and working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you particularly for reminding us of two very important things: how important the National Book Trust and the Sahitya Academy were in the enterprise of nation building in the 40s and 50s, and how many of us did our first reading with NBT books and Soviet books. I remember the Soviet books in particular very, very fondly. Also, another thing which I'd like to highlight from what you said is the idea that quite often translations go through other languages, that it's not necessary always for translations to be directly from one language to another. And I think that's also something that we need to consider. I know that Girish Karnad once was talking about how in the 70s and 80s, when there was also still in the nation building enterprise the idea of a national Indian theatre, when Badal Sarkar wrote in Bengali, or Tendulkar wrote in Marathi, or Karnad himself wrote in Kannada, immediately within a month those plays would be translated into other languages and they would be performed. And quite often one reason was that there were still in that generation people who were genuinely multilingual, like Karnad himself, who could translate from Marathi to Konkani like that. But also they were not hesitant at all about using another via media language. Badal Sarkar came into Kannada through Hindi. And these were sort of rough and tumble translations. They were meant to be staged immediately. They may not have been of the highest literary quality, but the idea that you don't have to move directly from one language to another, that sometimes it's very useful to have the middle language. So thank you for reminding us of both those things. Houston, you want Oh no, Satya's next, sorry.
Just a bit of.
A bit of background about what we do to provide perspective about what I'm going to say. We are a Tamil publisher. We started out about 7 years ago with a focus on publishing non-fiction, knowledge-oriented non-fiction in Tamil and other Indian languages over time, but we are still only in Tamil. We saw the gap, so to say, of a complete dearth of knowledge-oriented non-fiction content in the languages, and that's something that we thought ought to be addressed. And over the past 7 years, we have put out close to 1,300 titles, mostly non-fiction, some little bit fiction too, and we've also done some translations of Tamil fiction into English. The award-winning writers like Jayakantan, Ashok Mitra, Indra Pathati, and so on. And we've also done a little bit of work at children's books, which I'll come to talk about a little later. In addition to publishing books, we've also had to build our own distribution network across the state to sell the books, and we have a team of close to 30 sales staff fanning out across the state to sell books across 1,500 to 2,000 outlets, which are most of them not published book retailers. So based on my experience as a publisher of non-fiction in Tamil, publisher and distributor, I'm going to focus on the challenges in translating non-fiction from English to the Indian languages. And I believe translation is going to be very important for us as publishers, but also important for us as a society, and I'll try and explain why. But before I say anything, I'd like to do a simple thought experiment. Just imagine for a moment that you grew up without learning English. What would your life be like today? You wouldn't have access to books in English, no textbooks, no reference books, and not even the web, because most of the web is in English, very little is in the Indian languages today. So if you want to learn something about anything, what would you do? Where would you go? That is the state in which 90% of Indians who don't speak English are in today. They have very little access to any knowledge in their languages, and whatever is available simply pales in comparison to what is available in English, and something that we all take for granted. Now, that is the kind of problem or challenge that we face today in trying to educate all of us across the country, especially when people have left school and college and they're not going to be formally in the education system. So how do you help educate them? And every society has educated its citizens over time through books, and if books are not available, especially knowledge-oriented non-fiction books are not available in the Indian languages, then that's something that's going to be a big problem for us. Now, in a sense, paraphrasing the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said, the limit to one's knowledge is limited to the knowledge that is accessible in one's language. And I think that applies very much to people who are non-English speakers today in India. So that brings me to the importance of translation. So why is it that there is so little non-fiction content available in the Indian languages? Is it a supply side issue or is it a demand side issue? So on the supply side, is it a capability issue, something that means that we're not able to create good content in the Indian languages, or is it a lack of funding for some reason, or is it a lack of the ability to get content into the hands of the readers? So there is no distribution, so there is no incentive to publish, because you know that you can't sell more than 1,000 copies, so there's no point even in trying to do it. Now the demand side, is it an awareness? People don't read because they don't know that they ought to be reading, or is it because they don't know that there's a whole wealth of knowledge available in English and they're simply ignorant of that, so they're not reading, they're not even asking for anything? Or is it desirability? Why should I read? I'm okay where I am, and I don't need to read. Or is it affordability? That if such stuff is available, it'll be out of reach. I won't be able to afford it, so I won't even bother trying to read. So all of these are causes in various ways, and we have challenges both on the supply side and the demand side. So that brings me to creating content. Now it's difficult to create non-fiction content in the Indian languages since there are many people with strong domain knowledge who can write in the Indian languages. Now in other countries like Britain and America and France and Germany, the language of scholarship was also the language of the masses. So if you wanted to get a book out on any topic, you could always find somebody who was knowledgeable and who knew the language, who could write, and that could immediately be read by everybody in that society. But unfortunately today in India, the language of scholarship is English, especially when it comes to the sciences and the humanities. So you don't have people who are knowledgeable in a particular domain and can write on that in the languages. There is a small segment of such people who are bilinguals, who are knowledgeable because they have been in the English system, and they're probably on par with anybody else anywhere in the world, and they're probably fluent in their own language too because they've been growing up learning that language too. But then these people don't have the time or the inclination to write, sadly. That doesn't really mean much to them at all. So the only option that we will have is to look at translations, because there is a wealth of such information, such knowledge available in English, and if we want to bring all of that into the Indian languages and we can't get people to write in the original, we'll have to translate. So it's a chicken and egg problem. If you don't have good content, you can't have good writers, and if you don't have good writers, you can't have good content, so you need to translate. Now Japan went through a similar situation back in the mid-1800s, around the time of the Meiji Restoration, and they found that Europe had advanced sufficiently far on a variety of fronts, and so they were feverishly trying to catch up. So they set up a translation bureau to translate books from English, French, German and Dutch into Japanese. Now let me look at the funding aspect. Now publishing good translations is an expensive proposition since talent is scarce, and so you have to pay very well to incentivize them to consider translating, and translating is hard work. Now since distribution is a bottleneck, most publishers don't believe that they can actually sell enough copies. So if you can't sell enough copies, you won't be willing to pay a translator very much, so you won't get a good translator. And that is the state of affairs today. Most translators aren't very good, but we still have to make do with many of them. The National Translation Mission, set up by the central government a few years ago, is a huge step forward, and I'm sure Winston will have much more to say about it on that. Now, their focus is purely on translating non-fiction, higher education textbooks in particular, and that into the Indian languages, from English into the Indian languages, and they have already done quite a bit of work towards getting that process started. But more than the central government, I think it must be the state governments who must be actively involved in this, and I'm sure they can spend a few hundred crores over a period of few years and translate all kinds of textbooks, reference books, monographs, journals, magazines, general and trade books into the various languages, and that could make a huge impact. Unless the state governments get involved, I think it will be very difficult to make a substantial impact, and we need to be talking to the state governments to persuade them to get involved. Now there's a third option for funding which I'm going to propose, which is charity funding. Now if you look at what has happened in recent times, Ratan Tata, Anand Mahindra, Lakshmi Mittal, Narayan Murthy, Shiv Nadar, Sunil Mittal, Azim Premji, Nandan Nilekani, all of them have donated crores of their own money to educational causes in India and outside India too. Now if they were to put their money into a foundation to fund the translation of a large number of books into Indian languages. I think that could make a substantial impact. Not only in terms of the money and the work, but also in terms of raising the visibility of such an effort. Now, then we come to the challenges involved in translation. Now, assuming that the funding becomes available and everything is okay there, the task of translation will fall on us as publishers. So, what are the things that we need to really be looking at? What are the problems and challenges? The first thing is finding good translators, as I said earlier. And the other thing is to find good editors to edit the translations. Now, you have to ensure fidelity, and you also have to ensure readability. And the editors must be knowledgeable again in both the source and destination language. Ideally, on many occasions you simply don't have editors who are knowledgeable in both, so who are fluent in both. So you make do with editors who are fluent only in the destination language. And then you have to develop a new set of translators. I mean, there aren't enough translators. That's the reality. So how do you develop a new set of translators? I'll come up with some thoughts on that. Now, we can organize workshops, which the National Translation Mission is talking about. One other possibility might be to have an elective course, which is part of every college degree. Whether it's the sciences, whether it's the arts, whether it's engineering or medicine, where you're also taught to translate from English into a language. So every student who goes through a college course, if they are at least exposed to translation as an activity, they might be potential translators down the road. And if they are fluent in their language and even reasonably comfortable with English, that's something that would work. And it's only an elective, so they could opt in for that if they wanted to. Now, another option is to take the workshops that are conducted and put them up online on YouTube or any other site. Now, a lot of people who are amateur translators can then start looking at it and then picking up from there. And I think that's a fairly powerful method. I mean, I'll talk about how that kind of thing has worked out very well in a few other situations a little later. Now, there are a lot of retired government officials who are fairly knowledgeable about their own domains, and they're all of a generation who were bilingual. They learned English and they're also very fluent in their own languages. They're all retired, so I'm sure they will have the time, but do they have the inclination? Can we persuade them to get involved in translation? And then there are a lot of women with domain knowledge who have had advanced degrees and language skills who have decided to take a break and stay at home to look after the family and so on. Now, during their time at home, they could probably help in translation. So that's another segment that we could probably try and tackle. Now, if you come to the demand side, one of the repeated themes that we've been hearing over the past few days is that the potential for digital content is limited because access to devices is limited. Now, I would like to actually draw a parallel here to the growth of tele-density in India. Now, before the mobile phones, we only had landline phones, and they were very limited, as all of us can remember. You had to have a long waiting period to get a phone. And then in 1995, mobile phones first arrived. But till 2005, the tele-density was just creeping up marginally. And in 2005, 10 years after the launch of mobile phones in India, it was still just a meager 10%. But from 2005 to 2011, it just exploded. There was a tipping point, and today it's 70+%. And we're adding 20 million mobile phones, new mobile connections every month. Now, I think that kind of a tipping point in terms of access to devices, to screens, is not far away. And that tipping point is going to actually play a fairly important role for us. And there will be tablets, all kinds of screens, tablets, computers, mobile phone screens, and so on. And the price is also going to drop, and volumes are also going to pick up. Now, there will come a time in the future when every child in the country will have access to some kind of a screen, and you have wireless access available now, and there is a wireless broadband license which has been issued, so there will be wireless broadband available all across the country in the next few years. So that's going to be possible. And there is another development which has happened just very recently, which is actually could be a game changer in Tamil Nadu. Jayalalitha, the new chief minister, has launched a scheme where she's going to give out laptops, free laptops, to every student of class 11 and 12 and every college student in government colleges and schools in the state. 9 lakh laptops are going to be given out in this year, and overall over the next 5 years, 68 lakh laptops are going to be given out. The first free laptops were given out a couple of days ago in Chennai. Now, every one of those students is going to grow up on a screen, and not only them, the children and their siblings in their families are also going to have access to these screens. Now, when that happens, we have to be ready with the content. So what are they going to consume on these screens? So the demand side problem may be addressed to a certain extent, but what is going to happen if they don't have the content? So the onus is on us to create content for them. And there is a wealth of content which is out there, which is available and can be translated. Now, let me find out how many of you have heard of this person. How many of you have heard of Salman Khan? The other Salman Khan. Okay, a handful of people. Now, this is not the movie actor. This is somebody else who has done something very, very interesting. He has actually created a whole library of videos teaching math and a few other subjects to children. Okay, he just talks and writes on a screen, and that's all you see on the screen. You can listen to his voice and you can actually see what he's writing on the screen. Now, all of this video content can be translated into the Indian languages, and that process has already begun. Somebody has already started the process of translating it into Bangla and various other languages. Other people are talking to the Khan Academy to do that. So when we talk about digital content, we shouldn't be thinking of digital content as text alone. Now, we are a highly visual country, and I think we will absorb things far more quickly when the input is visual rather than text, especially if we are not very fluent in a language. So it makes sense, I think, to look at digital content in the form of video and use that as a supplement to the text content and not rely just on the text content alone. Now, what can we do in India to enable a platform for digital content? Now, Radhika talked about iPhones and iPads as something that's a good platform for children, but that may not be something that would work here because they are not in either iPhone or iPad or even the Kindle is compatible with the Indian languages. And we've talked to both Amazon and Apple to find out whether they have any interest or plans of enabling their platform for Indian languages, and they are not interested at the moment. They'll probably come to it at some point in the distant future. So before that, we'll have to try and build our own platforms. So we're trying to see if we can create a platform for all Indian languages, which is something that would work on a PC and should work on the iPhone platform and Android platform. So we're actually working on developing that, and we should probably have something to talk about by the end of the year. Now, we ourselves have been translating various kinds of books. So some of the books that we have translated are Ram Guha's India After Gandhi. We have put out a series of books on China, which is something that we believe is fairly important and interesting to readers. Pallavi Iyer's Smoke and Mirrors, Raghav Bahal's Superpower, and Prem Shankar Jha's Managed Chaos. We have also put out Boris Munshi's Breakthrough Innovation. And we will be launching Michel Danino's book on the Saraswati, the Lost River, very soon in the next month. And we've also tied up with Amar Chitrakatha to bring out their entire series in Tamil. About 30 titles are underway already, and then we'll bring out more titles. So I think I'll leave it there and then we'll pick up on Q&A.
Thank you, Satya. A very perfect segue for Winston. But there's one thing that I could certainly speak directly to. One of your suggestions that the way to support these knowledge-oriented translations into Indian languages is through philanthropy, and you mentioned all the IT czars who have started to donate personal funds in this direction. And Narayan Murthy's family has just bought the clay series. It used to be called the Clay Sanskrit series, and it was this. It came out of New York University or Columbia, wherever. But it was a series of quality controlled, very, very heavily curated translations of crucial Sanskrit texts, but across religions. So there were Jain texts and Buddhist texts and everything. And Narayana Murthy's family has just bought it because they ran out of money. The Clay Foundation stopped supporting it. But also interesting that now that the Narayana Murthy family has actually bought the Clay series, the nature of the series has changed completely. It's now Indic languages, and of course the first language that they're going to mine and excavate is Kannada. Fair enough, at least somebody's putting their money into the sharing of knowledges across times and across cultures. So, Winston.
Good evening. I'll not take much time. In fact, for the past 2 days I was looking at if there is a watch here, and every time I would pick up a cell phone and look at the time. Today I can see one watch there, so I'll keep time. I'm representing National Translation Mission. This is a new mission to you, some of you, but it started 3 years ago. The thinking behind this mission started very early. In fact, in the 1980s, late 80s, translation was, they started talking about translation in a big way in the academic circles. Then Katha came in, and the translation studies departments were set up in Central University, Hyderabad, and other things. Then in 2002, the people who were thinking are like, similarly, like National Book Trust, Sahitya Academy, and the Central Institute of Indian Languages in Mysore. They together launched a portal called anukriti.net. I don't know how many of you have seen it and use it. Anukriti.net, and maybe I can. That one can say was the starting point. That was in 2002. Then this was a kind of information site and service site, but let me not go to it much. Then in 2005 was a significant thing during this National Knowledge Commission when it was launched. At that time, the Prime Minister made a speech there, and he said we must invest in building the knowledge, base of our coming generations at all levels. So at all levels, there is a need to improve both access and excellence. This is how he made a speech. He was talking about a knowledge generation, knowledge society, and things like that. And that time, then these people in that knowledge commission, they took note of this, and people like Sam Petroda, they then wrote, they had a workshop on promoting translation industry in the country. They felt that translation is crucial for making knowledge accessible to all in Indian languages. And when translation is important, and it cannot happen in the way it used to happen in India before. That was the idea. Like it has been mentioned here now. It has been mentioned previously also, like that people said that there is no visibility to translators, there is no visibility to regional language publishers. In all this background, we cannot expect translations to happen in the manner that can change society. So it can be an individual effort, bringing the book I read, I liked, and I can bring it. It was like that, and mostly transcreation. So in this situation, they felt that something needs to be done to promote an industry, where people will be involved, and some sort of standards would be there. Not that it will be prescribed things, but that make it available to all, that they have some standards they see. And translators are recognized in a particular way, publishers of translations are recognized in a particular way, copyrights and paying royalty to the translators and all these things, get standardized in some way. That's what they thought. And they had this workshop. After that, Dr. Jayanti Ghosh, who's in JNU, who's a professor of economics, she drafted a proposal on National Translation Mission, and that was sent to Planning Commission, and then it was in 2005, 2006, and then in 2008 the National Translation Mission was launched with the Central Institute of Indian Languages, which was behind all these deliberations, as the kind of, it was the nodal office, it is the nodal office still, and it was launched. And National Translation Mission, that is the idea, to make knowledge accessible to all, basically to transcend language barriers, democratize knowledge, make it available to all, and create a knowledge society. These things were there. And how do you do it? The strategy, one of the ideas is to make, continuously, how do you establish a translation industry? You continuously publish translations, ensure that translations are published in different domains. That was an idea, not just literature, or a particular domain, in different domains. And particularly, like Satya was telling, that he wanted to catch the people who have left school or education, and then how to educate them. But this was something you catch them while they are inside that system, and introduce them to this, things, and make it accessible to them. So one of the strategies is to bring knowledge texts related to higher education into Indian languages, and initially in the 22 languages listed in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. So that is the idea. Then later on, in a long-term process, as a long-term goal, we would also between Indian languages, they would do, and from Indian languages to English also will happen at some point of time. And Mr. Rubin has been a part of this thinking that has gone behind all this National Translation Mission when he was part of NBT. So that is the idea, establishing translation as an industry by giving visibility to translators and support to publishers who would bring in translation, and establish a system where there will be evaluators for translation. In a sense, at the end of the day, you see, like if you leave the district headquarters, leave the state capital and the district headquarters, even if you go to the district headquarters and see in the colleges, a teacher would pick up an English book and continuously teach in the language of that place. That is the idea, to avoid regional and vernacular languages. So that is how the situation is. Like, you leave Bangalore and go to Ramanagaram, which is some 40-50 minutes, and you go there, and everything, BCom to everything is taught in the in Kannada. That is the idea. So these people continuously translate in the classroom. So in a sense, at some point of time, there is an awareness, and people see there is opportunity, and these people who are knowledgeable in, I am quoting someone, knowledgeable in 2 or more languages, we make them knowledge translators in those languages and provide them a way that they would also create knowledge in those languages at some point of time. That was the idea, very high goal, and when the government is doing, normally people would want to take it with a pinch of salt, sometimes with a spoon of salt. That is how it happens, because we know, we are enthusiastic about many things which the government has started, and at the end of the day, what has happened, like everybody is skeptic about those things. But I always feel some hope, maybe because I'm part of it, and I have to have that energy, right? And I know that it will happen. That is the idea. So beneficiaries, of course, students, teachers, translators, publishers, translation software developers. So in the way that National Knowledge Commission thought about it, they also thought that simultaneously, we should bring in dictionaries, we should produce glossaries, that if some new person, in Tamil wanted to bring, science text, then they should be looking for sources. At that time, they should be made available. That was an idea. So there was also a thought of, it is there, that e-dictionary in Indian languages, and many dictionaries are there in some of the languages, but not in all languages. Now, so e-dictionaries and other sources, so all these resources make them available to people who would enter into this place. So this is how we did it. We have taken a little time actually to assign translations immediately into Indian languages. It doesn't happen that way. That's what we realized after we began it, or we got into it, because we did a survey. Now, because it's government organization, you need to follow certain things, because everything has to be transparent. Everybody, there is an RTA now. Very good things are happening to check what you're doing. So in such a case, like things have to be put in place. So If you are translating knowledge text, for instance, who will decide it and how will you decide it? These questions, for all these things, they did a few things, like for selecting books, they said that, okay, we'll do a judicious mixture of what is used in the higher education, mostly. So the most prescribed text, that will be there, and also what is seminal, what is considered seminal in those areas. Like for instance, in physics, Feynman lectures in physics, it is seminal, but what happens is nobody prescribes them, or nobody, actually it is prescribed a lot of times, but nobody uses them in the classroom. Or in many universities, it is only the chapter 42 or 58 which is prescribed, because it's 3-volume, very big, book. But Feynman lectures is the basic. So they wanted to have a judicious mixture in these selections. So we set up a database, getting syllabi from more than 150 universities in the country, entering them and producing a list of most prescribed books, then pass it on to the experts, right? Discipline experts, and they would see and they would say, okay, this is the most prescribed book, but it is trash. These comments have come in a political science book. Rajni Kothari was rejected like that, though it was the most prescribed book. People said, yeah, we know it is, but it need not be read by these students. So such a thing, there had to be some judicious mixture of selection. So in physics, for instance, I will take up again. Fundamentals of Physics by Halliday was taken, Halliday and Resnick, and Feynman lectures. So one seminal book, one textbook kind of, which will serve. This kind of thing has happened. It is how the books have been shortlisted in each discipline. Now, they have identified some 69 disciplines in which books should be brought out into Indian languages. And when you take up a discipline, it's not like you publish one book now and after 5 years another book will come in that discipline, and then there is no point. Such efforts have happened in the past, in the 1960s and 70s. In many, like in Kerala, for instance, Kerala State Institute of Languages still does it. They have brought in lot of higher education textbooks into Indian language. They have done translations. They have continuously done translations. In Tamil it is there, but they are not printed again. They were done once and they were lying there. Like for instance, in Marathi, I don't know if you know, Principles of Mathematical Analysis by Walter Rodin has been translated long back. People would love to have that book even now in English. Like they are trying to look for the book, and if they get it, they'll be happy. But it was translated into Marathi long back, but people will not know it. So all these things, people have to take care. So what they said is, so if we take up chemistry, for instance, it's not that this mission will publish one book on organic chemistry this year, and after 10 years, another book on inorganic chemistry, or physical chemistry another after 5 years. So at a time, some 3 to 5 books, so that some areas of the discipline is covered, so that a student would feel comfortable. Okay, I can read these things. So when it brought down to students level, like thinking about students, that thought came in. Then people also said, we are not going to change the education system or the medium of instruction. In National Translation Mission, it doesn't aim at changing the medium of instruction, but the mission wants to provide a smooth transition. Suppose I'm a history student and I go out, I have done my history in Tamil up to the +2, that is second PU. Then if I go to the college and I get prescribed, Topper is getting prescribed, then I see Topper is a little voluminous, and the volume and the language also is a little tough, not for you, but for a student from Tamil, definitely it's tough. Topper's language is not that easy. So Topper, I see, okay, it is big, it is little, in English, then it is price high. All these things they wanted to reduce. That was the idea. So if we bring in a book in Tamil, so the volume will not matter to me much, as it would in an English thing, and price it lower than the English original. That is also the policy of the government. Then I would pick it up probably, and when I read it, I get some confidence of reading Topper. Probably the next book I would pick an English book of Topper. This is very idealistic thinking. If it goes like this, if at all people start reading like this, it will be the most wonderful thing. But this is how it is. So this is how it was thought, and we are trying to, and we face all, since see, many of you are publishers in the field, and you're having no clue of who are your translators, who will fund it, who will, many questions, and you have stopped almost at the door, not entering in, because of various these problems. Think about a government organization which has no relationship with any of these things, and suddenly want to find out translators, want to find out publishers, want to find out distributors, because many of these university publications and government publications, except for like Sahitya Academy, has now gone into distributing in a bigger manner. You find it in a lot of bookstores, but for a long time you didn't find them anywhere else. And many other research institutes, it's only there in their stall or only in their place. So to break all these things, it took some time. So one of the things, major thing in the decision policy making was to involve publishers, to involve publishers in this process, so that in this creation of a market for these languages, they would be involved. So they will feel confident at some point of time who would use the same translators or other people, and who would also see the market and start producing in these languages. In that way, this ultimate aim of establishing a translation industry would become possible at some point of time. I firmly believe it will happen. There are lot of other things. Like I said, government is thinking of these things. We launched. I'll quickly. Just a minute. So this is a website of this National Translation Mission, ntm.org.in. If you find it, it is there in 22 languages, Indian languages. Like we had problems of book publishing is still a problem, and all those books to be made available as digital books will be a problem. But this website at least it is there in 22 languages. You can see this later at home or something. One particular thing I was telling someone this today, that this Sindhi, Sindhi, you see this page would exactly look like the English or any other page, but the things behind is that every bit of it is an image, except this, what is called, that is also an image. Everything, no, this is not Sindhi. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, it is. So what happens is this is Sindhi, and there is the Devanagari is a modified Devanagari. It's not the regular Devanagari that you use. So everything here is image, and it is unsearchable. Like you cannot search it, you cannot do anything else with it. So because we had a font problem, right? We couldn't create even an EOT, on the fly font or anything for that. But we are trying to reach out to people through these mediums also. And e-publishing has been thought about, and there is a whole lot of series of this NPTEL. I don't know how many of you, it was talked about, Mr. Balani mentioned it, that Enlist program, which government has acquired a lot of rights for a lot of 6,000 about titles under new mission called on education through internet technology, and IITs have produced over some 3,000, 4,000 videos of their lessons, like the Khan Academy thing, and there is a project to translate these things also. So we have that, like NMEICT is sending that to translation mission. So there's a lot of things, but we have to wait and we have to get involved. That is one thing. All of us have to get involved, and this is, you can take it as an invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Winston, for reminding us that the government can be sensitive and enlightened and forward-looking. We tend to forget that. And also that the government can be vulnerable. It needs translators and publishers, and that's all of us. So, and also thank you for that lovely piece of gossip about Rajni Kothari's text, which is trash.
What mean is
Too late for that now. Beauty, you will be next.
Thank you. Good evening.
how to start? Well, translation has always been a kind of obsession for me. I mean, personally. I'm so, for example, I'm so grateful to the translator of Dostoevsky from Russian language into French language for giving me the opportunity to read his masterpieces in my native language. And in the same time, I'm still very, very frustrated by the fact that I'll probably never be able to read Dostoevsky in Russian. So we are talking about something which is absolutely necessary and in the same time very, very frustrating. As you said, Arsha, reading a translation, we lose and we win something in the same time. So I've been linked to translation markets from different positions. First at the head of the French book office in Bucharest in Romania a few years ago. And I had then to think about how we could bring French books to the Romanian market in Romanian translations. And I mean in Romanian only. In India, we have to deal with this multilingualism. I mean, when a French book is translated into Hindi, for example, I still have to work for months just to get it translated and published in Malayalam, in Telugu, and Bengali, whatever editions. So it's never accomplished, if I could say, never finished. So this is something that complicates matters, of course, but this is probably what brings me to India as well, the fact that this is a multicultural and multilingual country. So it's quite challenging for us to make French titles present here in India, while Indian publishers have to translate their own literature from one Indian language to another Indian language. So in the meantime, I spent 4 years in the foreign rights department of a French publishing house, Gallimard. And what I used to do there only for the writers of the Gallimard team I was representing, I mean founding projects and trying to find the best publisher for them in Romania, in Albania, in Russia, whatever. Well, here in India we try to do exactly the same thing, but for all the French writers, of course, and in all the Indian languages, not only in English, but Indian languages and English. So I'll come back to this English issue a bit later because I think it's really important. But I come from a country which decided that there will be a book attaché in its embassy in India. So I can often hear, well, you're a book attaché, but what is it exactly? The first question. And then comes the comment, well, you probably have the best job of the whole embassy, and that's what's probably true. So you can find these book attachés, who are cultural attachés, but only dedicated to books in only a dozen of French embassies in the world, no more. So what does it mean? It means that we think in France that French publishers cannot ignore the Indian market anymore. And in fact, since my arrival, so you're right, I'm 1 year old here, I really feel that Indian publishers are quite interested in French literature, in French books, but that they're a bit lost in the huge production of French books. And on the other side, I really feel that that the French publishers are really interested in Indian literature, but that they don't always know how to jump into it concretely. I mean, so we are here to put the French and the Indian professionals in touch, to inform, to assist both Indian and French publishers, but not only translators, writers, even readers if necessary, and to work as a channel of connections between them. So if we often promote Indian literature in France, it's not our main goal, that's true. Well, the government in India has probably a couple of replies for this, and so I was very interested with what I just heard from Winston. But another example, they have recently responded to this interest by launching a new mission, Indian Literature Abroad program, ILA, which promotes the translation of Indian literature from 24 Indian languages into 6 UNESCO languages, including French. So it's only an example, and I'm not in the right position to comment this further. But the interest in France for Indian literature is still there. A lot of French publishers still have a whole series of Indian books. So on our side, that's true that we are focused on translation from French into Indian languages and English, including English, I could say. So one of the aims of the book office is to mediate in obtaining rights to French books for Indian publishers who would like to publish French title in translation. So we have a French program called the Publication Assistance Program, which is existing in a lot of countries all over the world. And it started in 1990 and has enabled over 12,000 titles by French language writers to be translated in 75 countries. So in India, the Publication Assistance Program is called Tagore, and it helps publishers who wish to publish French book translated into any Indian language, into English, but as well into any Indian language. I really insist on this. So without any restriction in terms of kind of the works, could be literature, could be children's literature, could be graphic novels, could be scientific publications, whatever. So just a few words on this program. We can take care of the rights acquired from a French publisher, and as well we take care of part of the production, translation, or communication cost of the book. So there's 2 sessions every year, one in March, April, and the second one, well, right now, September, October. So I won't be too long on this program, but I remain, of course, at your disposal if you need any further details. So to come back to the question of English language in India, which is very, very interesting for me, obviously for historical reasons. If I could say, I have to admit that I'm facing a problem coming from France mainly, not from India. I mean, French publishers are usually quite cautious. Well, they are not used to sell rights for English language to Indian publishers. So you have to know that for French writers, an English language translation is really, really, really a must. And their publishers are really, really, really under pressure to find a publisher for them in US or in UK, because they want a publisher in London or in New York. Well, it's exactly as if a British, well, an English writer would be really keen to be published in French language. Well, he will request a publisher in Paris, not in Quebec. I mean, it's obvious. So, and we all know in France how the American and English markets are quite closed to foreign literature, at least to literature which is not written in English. As an example, I was telling you this half, but I will say it on as well. If you go in a bookstore in New York, you will just see that maybe less than 5% of the books are translated. If you go in a bookstore in Paris, you'll see that more than 50% of the books are translated from abroad. So it's really a huge difference, but that's not the point. It remains that any hardback or even paperback edition published by a publisher in London, for example, which has acquired the rights to sell its edition in India as well, is still quite very expensive for the Indian market. So, of course, we can imagine sub-licenses and so, but it's really part of my job to try to convince as well the French publishers to sell rights directly to the Indian publishers, to convince them that they could try to separate the territories in 3, for example, US, UK, and India, and not only in 2 as they usually do until now. So things are changing quite slowly, but they are changing. So just a few words on the other activities of the book office. We help, of course, in the circulation of information and news, in the identification of titles, for example, through Bibliofrance, which is a new biannual publication, kind of rights catalog of contemporary French books, especially designed for India. We hold regular events and book releases involving Indian and French writers, but I'll maybe be shorter on this. We organize international seminars, for example, the next one last day of September at IIC in Delhi about intellectual property and copyright in the book world, called Tolkien Rights in the Digital Age, which is a seminar, it has been thought really as a French, Germano-Indian seminar on legislation, but as well on culture and practices and new strategic challenges of digitalization. And well, I think listening to all these sessions today, that we stick to what needs to be again and again and again discussed, and not only here. So we also organize workshops, and one of them each year is focused on translation from French to Indian languages, and this time excluding English. For one simple reason, if a publisher has acquired rights for a French book in India, if it's in English, for English language, it will probably find quite easily a translator to do the job. But if we're talking about Hindi, Malayalam, Marathi, whatever, it will be more difficult for the publisher to find good and available translators from French into these languages. There are very few, and my feeling is as well that there is a huge lack of translating courses here. So yeah, the question of translating through another language, just through English, the main language, mainstream, is quite interesting. It's something that we could imagine, but it's really not ideal. So once a year we invite this translator to attend a week-long workshop on literary translation, taking place in IGNU University in Delhi, which hosts, by the way, a School of Translation Studies. Because of course, if we manage to increase the number of rights sold and the number of translations here for French book, we need translators. It's simple and obvious, but we really need them. And then at that precise moment, the book office is really the kind of channel of connections I wanted to. Then I think I'll stop here because I'm keen to hear the other speakers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Judith. You said that your job is the best job in the whole embassy. I think it's probably the most terrifying job in the whole embassy. I mean, it's so interesting to see it from the outside, in terms of like multiple language markets. Also, earlier this morning when we were talking very briefly about using linked languages for translation or a via language, and Judith was like, no. And by the end of the day, she's thinking, well, it's not ideal. Also, just, of the 6, 7 of us on this panel, 3 of us have now spoken of the need for translation courses or training, if not courses, Satya and then Winston and now Judith as well. That's just an observation. Well, anyway, it just means that anybody here who's looking for a mid-career shift, think about translation. Because Arunav and I are going to be overwhelmed in the next couple of years, and as translators. Thank you, Judith. Neeta?
Hi, I'm Neeta Gupta from Yatra Books, and I'm a publisher with Yatra Books, and it's a very small independent publishing house. And yet we have this, we share these synergies. We have a co-publishing imprint with Penguin India, which is really our bread and butter. So that is something where we earn from, and then we have a smaller list of titles that we've published on our own, which are translations from Indian languages into Hindi or English, and European languages. So we've done works from Assamese into Hindi. We've done works from Catalan, a short story collection from Catalan into Hindi. Then we worked on a massive project. I'm not showing the title of the book, but just to see the size, it's a 1,000-page tome in collaboration with the French Embassy. And so, we have in fact, you were mentioning the ELA project. So what we are doing actually is complements the ELA. The ELA is basically trying to take the best of Indian writing in 22 languages and present it to the world in the 6 UNESCO approved languages. And what we are trying to do is bring works that we feel will work in the Indian market and try and get it translated into as many Indian languages. So far we've worked with Marathi, Urdu, Hindi, but we're looking for partners, we're keen to look at other languages. It's just that, sitting in Delhi, it's sometimes not possible. And then there are local, there's already a publisher. So we're quite happy to collaborate with other publishers and sort of share our synergies, share our titles. And I think, most of the points that I would like to talk about, Satya has already brought up when he talked about, so let me not waste more time. I mean, I would just like to maybe say a little bit more about our Penguin Association. The relationship with Penguin is really where I learned about the market of books, because before that I was editing a journal, which was an academic journal on translation brought out by a translation bureau. So it was a nicely supported thing by a ministry, very neat and cozy. We had a list of subscribers. We never had to, we had nothing to do with the market. But when we started working with Penguin, suddenly that failure hit us, and we had 20 books out in the market, and they just sank without a trace. And then we translated, like Satya mentioned, we suddenly brought out a list of non-fiction titles, which was Freakonomics, World is Black, Nandan Nilekani's book, Shobha Day, and we hit the bullseye with the non-fiction list. So it was amazing. It was a revelation, because I always imagined that people only want to read literature or fiction. And it was an eye-opener. So we, in fact, I was telling Satya yesterday that if I probably did a book called How to Lose Weight in 100 Days, I would probably be a millionaire. I'll sell 1 lakh copies and be a millionaire, but I can't do it. And so that was one of the things. The issues again regarding translation, because I think some of the best translators are sitting on our panel, but it is very hard for the rest of us to get good translators, especially from languages like, so say from English to Hindi, which don't share an idiom. I mean, English to Hindustani, because Hindustani shares a lot of vocabulary with Urdu, there is a lot of, the urban kind of, and they share the book, and there's a lot of, it's possible to translate ideas or idiomatically translate from English to Urdu or Hindustani, but with Hindi, we hit a kind of a roadblock. But again, that roadblock comes in when you're working with fiction, because for some reason, when you're dealing with economic issues in a very globalized situation, there's no boundaries. There's no absolutely that disappears. It just melts, because everybody's interested in what is the recession, what is this, how to make money, how to best manage your. So it just disappears. I mean, then nobody's bothered, because that same thing in the case of fiction is and we face it, because I did the Catalan stories, which are beautiful, extremely elegant, universal stories, but when we translated them into Hindi, except for a few which sort of crossed over, but the others just they never sort of made any sense to the reader. In fact, even my editor sitting in the office said that, who's going to read this very depressing story? And so it is a problem. Now, also about the problems, I mean, we're talking about translation, and one of the biggest problems with Hindi, again, is the Hindi medium education system, because I had a proofreader, and I was sharing the story with Arshia earlier. I had a proofreader who was working, she first worked on Tehmina Amam's translation, The Golden Age, and she worked on something else, and then she worked on Rambo, the final, she was checking the proof, the spell check and whatever. And she came to me and she very hesitating, I mean she was very hesitant, and she asked me that, she was confused that East Pakistan and Bangladesh, she said, I think there's some confusion in the book. So I said, she couldn't believe it's the same geographical. For her it was just a revelation. And I don't blame her. She actually, it's not her fault, it's the education system. They have never seen an atlas in school, they have never been shown and I guess they come from homes where even their parents are not educated. So I mean, they're really the first time, people who've gone into higher education. And even in higher education, in Hindi, apart from journalism, political science, and literature, there's no other, there's no scope for higher education, and you can see that. You can see that the journalists are really, they're all there screaming their heads out, doing that, their spiel on television. But when it comes to writing, and that's, you mentioned the same thing. So it's just, we face similar problems. In terms of what is lacking, I just wanted to share this with Winston, that I feel dictionaries, say trilingual dictionaries, linking languages like Tamil, Assamese, using English or Hindi as a bridge. I think this is something that your translation mission should be looking at, where you link Malayalam, Gujarati, Assamese, Tamil, Kannada, and use one of these languages as a link. And in fact, I wanted to also suggest, and maybe I can give you the details later. We have a person who did the NBT, he did the thesaurus for NBT, and this is Mr. Arvind Kumar. He did a fabulous thesaurus cum dictionary for us, which is a Hindi, English, Hindi dictionary and thesaurus. And his software, because I've seen it on his computer, has he's got spaces for introducing any language, and it completely converts. He's made that software himself, and I think this is something that you can just, because he's not a man who's after money, he's a man who's looking to give, and he's got a database of some 10 lakh words in Hindi right now, but they can easily be translated into any language, and I think the translation mission should approach him and maybe do some kind. I think a lot of people, I think Microsoft tried to do it, Google tried to get that for the Hindi dictionary and thesaurus, but he's not so much into money, he's keen to work with at a national level, so maybe that's something you should look at. Jude, if you were talking about not enough people knowing translations, doing translations directly from French to Indian languages. And I think that partly the problem is that people who go to learn foreign languages in India are very urban, chic, there's a kind of a hip crowd who goes, what should we do this summer? Let's learn a foreign language. So I had a chat with Oscar Pujol, who's at the Cervantes Institute, and he said that he was willing, he's keen to set up a class specially catering to, right now they only have a center in Delhi, to students who speak in Hindi. Because in any case, their classes are totally immersed in Spanish, nobody speaks any language. So he's developing the study material in Hindi. So you have trained translators. You have immediately a kind of an army of translators who have studied Spanish, and they know their Hindi beautifully, so they can really take it forward, the whole project. And maybe the audience should also think of something like that. There was another thing that I have to say. In fact, I myself, the translators that I find who do beautiful translations for me are people who work from our student, they're English literature students. These are translators who work from English to Hindi. They're English literature students who've studied in smaller towns like Aligarh, Lucknow. Their Hindi is beautiful. They have actually studied English literature in Hindi. So they have absorbed, they understand it beautifully, and their Hindi is clean and it's got a kind of, it's not a dry Delhi Hindi, it's got the local touch. So, so when they translate work for me, it's just simply beautiful. I don't have to edit, I don't have to prove nothing. So something like that is another option that one can use for, I think, yeah. Besides that, I think it's exciting to be here. I'm totally dedicated to this, to translations too, and I love to be the interface between publishers and authors, and I wish it would pay me much more than what it is doing right now. But it's great to be here, and it's great to be here on this panel, and thanks.
Thank you, Nita, and also thank you very much for pointing out that there are very few panels at so many literary publishing occasions that actually deal with translation and with this kind of sort of variety, with width and with breadth and depth. Yeah. Very quickly, just an aside, I find it fascinating that English translating English and Hindustani are similar matches. But again, I think one of the things that has come up from your comments is the infrastructure that is needed to support translation, whether it's young people who are schooled more completely than the young people that come out of regional language schools at the moment, or whether it's dictionaries. And the story you're telling about this gentleman with the 10 columns and all of that. I mean, first of all, the dictionary is the most important thing. I mean, remember, some of our finest language dictionaries have come from the colonial period. Yeah, the first thing they did was learn the language. How do you control people? Tell them how to say it. Yeah, but they were all crazy people. I mean, Monia Williams' Sanskrit dictionary is not the work of a sane person. So lexicography and all of those. If we could only create more and more opportunities for young people to see these things. So of course, since the final word lies with my fellow translator, I'm sure you will remind people that you and I are not making a living off being translators. We have day jobs.
No, I really think that our next challenge in India is going to be to translate English into English, because the majority of books that are sold these days have titles like Oh Shit, Not Again and Love Under the Umbrella, and the subtitle of which is, it's called A Kiss Under the Umbrella, and the subtitle is Love is the Weather of Life. Now, until you reach the point where you can take Jean-Paul Sartre or John Steinbeck and translate them into this form of English, we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm afraid none of the people on this panel are going to do this. Okay, seriously now. Yes, we don't make a living off translation, and I'm glad we don't, frankly. Because if it became a day job, I don't think it would be a very exciting affair. And with all due respect to the government, I sincerely hope the Indian government is not going to start training translators or create a national public sector unit of translation. That's not the way we are going to be able to get this job done. Okay, so we all know the cultural reasons for translation, and one doesn't need to go over those, but are there good market reasons? And this is what I've been trying to argue with many of the publishers I work with. See, the books that you choose for translation have already been published, and if you're wise, smart, they've already got big markets in their original language. So you're not starting blind. You're not starting with an author who you hope will turn in a fantastic manuscript. You're starting with a book that's already proved itself with a large reading market. So that's logic number one, why publishers should be going more and more for translations if they want bigger markets. Two, if you're going to really have people all over the country reading, then you have to give them books that are about themselves, about their own lives, about their own country. it cannot be, Indian reading cannot be sustained primarily on books from the West. It cannot be sustained primarily on recent books written in English. It has to be sustained on the deep and rich century or so of fiction and non-fiction writing that we've had in India over 20 and more languages. And publishers have to invest in this simply because that's the way to grow the market for books and for reading. Indians are very smart people. They are not, it's very easy to dismiss people as saying they're not interested in good stuff. That is simply not true. Indians are very discerning. They are very clear about what they want from how they're going to spend their time. So it's the marketers, the companies, the corporates, the publishing companies' job to make sure that the best content is made available to them. And the best content already exists out there. It has existed out there for the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. You just need to go out and make it available to everyone. 3, I can only talk from the perspective of translating into English. And I think that's the way of the future. I completely understand the requirement and the value of translating into the other Indian languages. But the fact is, the unfortunate fact, if you like, is that anyone who is literally upwardly mobile aims to read in English. All right. The fact of the matter is that people in India's main cities, in the state capitals, no longer read in their mother tongues. They talk in them perhaps, they use the English language to communicate in them on text messages and on chat, but they do not use the original alphabet to read. So let's get the books out to them in the language that they will accept. So that's reason 3, the market will expand. And 4th and last, aren't you happy? India is a very young country. 60% of the population of India is under 30. And as a nation, we completely have no sense of history. Most of our country just don't know what happened in anything that's more than 5 years ago. I think literature, fiction particularly, is a great way of bringing India's history back to Indians. Books that have been written over the past century will tell a story like nothing else can. And that's a great reason, that's a fantastic reason actually to ensure that all of this wealth of literature becomes available in translation, in other languages, in English, in a form in which it can be bought, read, passed on, shared, appreciated, digested, mangled, discussed, distorted, but lived. That's the key thing, right? No one lives books sufficiently. We just need to make sure that people live books. Yeah, that's about it. And Arshia and I both translate because we love it, and we'll continue to do it because we love it. I don't think anyone could really pay us enough to make it a day job. And there must be like a dozen authors in India who make a living out of writing. I don't think there are more than that. Everybody else does something or the other. So it's good to talk about being a professional writer, but it's not going to happen. So it's important that we have lots more of these passionate translators, and they're there. They're out there. They need, I'm not sure about formal training. I think that becomes, I'm very scared of creative writing courses. So I think they just need to work, produce work, let good editors look at them, teach them how to do it better, and keep improving, and publish them. What can be better incentive? Publish the works, and they'll be happy, they'll want to do these things. Yeah, that's about it, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for, I think you were a very, very appropriate remarks to close the panel, and thank you for actually speaking more than 2 minutes as you were threatened. So my 2-minute panel has actually taken an hour and 45 minutes, which is fantastic. And anybody comments, suggestions, questions, recommendations, compliments? Compliments are always nice, yes.
There's this site called .sup, D-O-T-S-U-P, that does an awesome job of translation. All of us know about TED videos, and we noticed that most of the TED videos are actually translated about 10 to 15, 20 languages, and it's all done through crowdsourced method. And even in Indian languages, about half a dozen Indian languages, they've been translated brilliantly. Just any video to any language format, which surprisingly I think a whole lot of us are unaware about that. So just wanted to point that out. And our any one of the publishers, are we using that platform which is already existing?
There's a wonderful essay by Umberto Eco called Mouse or Rat, and he talks about translating through the old Alta Vista. Do people remember the Alta Vista browser? Are we old enough to remember that? And he translates, he puts in the opening chapters of Genesis from the Bible. It's really, really worth a read. And it's sort of, well, just read it. Anybody else like to comment on that?
I think it is a factual error to say that upwardly mobile Indian literary people reads in English. Say, for example, if I say, I think Harry Potter is read more in Hindi than in English in that area. Arundhati Roy's work, God of Small Things, is read in more number of copies in Malayalam than in English in Kerala. I mean, the Indian language markets are huge. In Kerala, there are 55 lakh children learning in Malayalam medium and 8 lakhs in English medium. And most of these people in English medium can only read Malayalam. So it is huge. I think it is a common misconception that people in English read more.
Sorry, I think my question is completely unanswered. My question is...
Oh, was there a question? I'm sorry, we thought you were all making a comment. My mistake.
Oh, sorry. So I wanted to ask, .sub is a brilliant translation tool used for videos. I just got a message that there's this movie, a 4-minute movie today, a 4-minute movie that's been translated to 100 languages. And Stanford University lectures are translated to about, what, 170, but I doubt there are so many languages, but it says 170. Well, that's humongous. While that's brilliantly succeeded videos, I know them because the TED videos have been translated. My question to the translators out here and to the people in this hall, are we using similar such tool for translating our books?
No. I think I would second what Rubin said, that upwardly mobile people in the metros are all reading English. I wouldn't agree with that at all. I think there are enough people who know English but are far more comfortable reading in their own languages, as long as there is material available to read.
The answer is still no.
No, it's not so much answering his question.
Yeah,
it's
just
sort
a
of
moment.
reacting to-
That's answering my statement, for which we will take outside.
Okay. Yes, but I think Neeta would like to answer the gentleman's question, so that is addressed. And before you, Mandira, Nilanjana's had her hand up at the back, so, and then Kanan. Yeah? Okay. So, Neeta will now answer the gentleman's question.
Basically, we do not use the internet for translations at all, because we work with literature, we need to have, we cannot depend on electronic translations at all. If you will, it works for a movie or it works for a, it would not work. And even for a film, I think, for a serious film, if you want something quickly, to put something quickly out there, it makes sense to use the net. But if you're looking at something serious, you can't depend on the net.
Thank you, Neeta. Nilanjana at the back.
Yeah, just a quick response to Rubin, and I hope I don't start a language war out here. But just looking at the census figures and any studies of languages and how they're growing in this country, it's inescapable, unfortunately, as much as some of us are dismayed at it, that English does have a hegemony. It seems to be the fastest growing language right now. It has been the fastest growing over the last 10 years or so. And I think what is worrying a lot of people who've been studying this area is also that this growth has been accompanied by a loss of reading in several other major languages. There are stats to show that the number of people, formerly robust markets, the lakhs and lakhs of readers whom they used to depend on in Bengali or Marathi or Gujarati, you don't know how long you're going to be able to rely on those. So I think, either way, the translator's job seems to become even more urgent at this point of time. Either you're feeding better content in your own language or in Indian languages to local audiences that don't have enough reading matter, or you're trying to do the same thing with English. You're trying to bring up, as Arnava suggested, this huge body of Indian literature that just goes unseen. Just comment.
I'll just respond to that very quickly and then ask my co-panelists if they would like to respond. I think what Arunava was talking about really was literary translation. And I think that Satya and Ruben are both right to talk about knowledge-oriented translation and who feels comfortable reading what in which language. And you're right, I mean, this could start a language war. So we'll give the next question to Vandana.
If you read the Bangla review pages, there's quite a lot of interest in books still. And it's interesting that some books are translated from English. I notice something encouraging in that younger people in their 30s and some in their 20s are really bilingual too, because we get translations from them. On our translations, I think as something Judith and you were saying, I was a bit taken aback sometimes when we've translated from Bangla or Marathi into English. And then we get a letter from another publisher of another language saying we want to use that translation to go into Malayalam or whatever. And you sort of hesitantly say, but this is already done, one distancing, and don't you want to go back to the original? And they say, well, yes, ideal, but then it will never get done. So this is something we're going to have to live with. Yes, please.
No, talking about the interest in the young people today. In the case of Tamil, the others would agree. Like a lot of these software people in US, they maintain parallel blogs. Like in internet, a lot of them is available. Lot of like books that I have not as a growing up in a Tamil home have not seen or read. They have introduced. Many of small books around. Somehow they have gone to some place, they have found one book and they write reviews about it. So there are different things. And talking about Nilanjana's that population studies thing, I want to know the source, like the census studies.
Kamal?
I just want to say something about promotion of translations of Indian literature. Can I make a comment? I've been trying to promote Indian, at least Tamil literature, to other Indian languages, especially through Rubin's attempt to have rights table for 2 or 3 years. And then by going to Frankfurt over the last 3 or 4 years and trying to promote international languages. And the net result has been, very, very difficult. It's a really uphill task. I think we need the government of India should set up a body to promote translations. That actually in the model of minority language, fund translators and probably subsidize production. And that's the way I think to really promote translation within the Indian languages, and also help us to take Indian language literature to European languages, which is very nearly impossible. Generous translation or subsidized funding. And I hope we can make a start here, probably by passing a resolution and sending it to Government of India. Thank you.
So there's parts of the government sitting right here, so we don't have to send the resolution very far. But but I think that perhaps you and Yudit can have a very real conversation at the end of this evening.
I just want to add that the program goes through the French embassy here in India is linked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, but that our Ministry of Culture, for example, so I just speak for France, of course, have a lot of programs as well, helping foreign publishers to translate literature in France. Well, they would say helping French publishers to buy rights for literature coming from abroad. So some programs exist. So for France, I could help you maybe, and for the other countries, not.
Yes, there is still Radhika, traveling microphone.
This is to So, I don't know the answers, but our own experience, Nilanjana's comment about reading in the languages. What we find 15 years down the line after doing children's books in 9 languages, we do find that the urban market, the school market, is opening up to languages. And I think something is happening, something has changed. Bilingual books, for instance, are being used by the fancy play schools, the kangaroo kids, and on its own, we haven't done, we just made it available, we put it out there. The fact that there are picture books, beginner books for children, which are as good as the English books, I think there was a problem of quality there. And where we could put them at the same level, suddenly it became more accessible, suddenly it became more attractive, and the experience of co-publishing with regional language publishers, with Eklavya, with Reuben, State Children's Literature Institute, and so on, has been a constant learning experience, because it has impacted both ways. And I think something is happening, and I think it also has to do with film and television and bilingualism being very comfortable and accepted. So this kind of divide between the two is slowly, not without its problems, but slowly disappearing is what I think.
It has to be a very quick response and absolutely the last word, because we are well past our deadline and there's still things to come. So a very quick response, Nilanjana, and then I will say...
No, just to clarify that there was no ideological point out there. I was just looking at the statistics and what they say about the spread of languages. And just to raise the concern, I'm really happy to know about this. This is something actually I've been following for a while. And I think books like yours answer a very real demand. But one of the reasons why there is that demand is because of the loss of our own languages. And I think all of us should be concerned about that.
Thank you, Nilanjana. And instead of us thinking about the loss of our languages, let us think of the many, many more literatures and languages that we can access through translation. Just to end on a positive note, thank you all very, very much. Thank you for making the time to be here. Thank you for being so gracious with your thoughts on this panel. And you lot, thank you for your stamina. I'm in awe of your stamina. Thank you for staying right through to the end.